This is an introduction to Syft Analytics' new financial statements and disclosures tool. So immediately upon landing on the financial statements dashboard, which can be found in the Financials tab under Financial Statements, we are immediately greeted with a dashboard showing all of the financial statements you have created and a banner that is disclosing that for now this feature is in beta until July 2024 and will be free to use until then, but after that point this will be a paid add-on that will be needed to be added to your subscription, so it is important to take note of that. Now, getting into the actual use case and usability of the feature, there are two components to it, the Financial Statements tab, as I've already explained, and the Disclosures tab. So we're going to start with the Financial Statements tab, and this is where you will create the core statements which serve as the skeleton, or at least the main body, of your actual financial statements. Here we can see I've already created one as an example, but to start right from the beginning, if we click on the Add Financial Statements button, we will be greeted with the creation dialog. Here you can name your financial statements, whatever you may please, so whatever financial year you may be preparing it for. You can toggle to view it as either a monthly, quarterly, previous 12 months, whereby you can set exactly which date you would like it or which month you would like it to end, as well as financial year. And the annual financial year option will pull through the financial year that is being picked up by your underlying accounting provider. Now, once that is done, you can also select which period you would like your statement to be created for, and this is quite important as it designates what information will actually be populated in your statements and in your disclosures. On the next tab, we will have your company details. Now, these can be filled in, and thankfully, once you've filled them in once, which I've already done creating this preliminary example in the background, it will retain that information for future ones that you create. So that's quite nice, saves you a bit of time, and makes sure that you don't have to replicate unnecessary work. If we go next to the stakeholders, that's the exact same situation where you enter it once and the creation dialog will save those preferences, but you can always go through and make any changes for any new reports. And then on the next tab, we will have the actual report selection that will be populated in your financial statements. For now, we have the choice of your balance sheet, profit and loss, and your two cash flow statements. And you can then also give it a theme, which draws on Syft Analytics reports library and theming. So that is quite a nice point there. You can get a really nice customized theme to match your AFS statement if you would like. Now, if I jump directly into this example one I've created, there's a few more things to note. We can designate a preparer and a reviewer based on the users on your Syft organization. We can also set the status to be one of these few options, and that's quite nice because we do have a filtering option to look at your different statements either based on who's prepared it, who is reviewing it, and what status it is in. But also quite a nice feature is that once you have put a statement into the final status, you then have the capability to lock it to ensure that if you have finally, as the reviewer perhaps, given your approval, you can then lock it and there can be no changes made further. And then you can also download, delete it, or also, if you would like, give some feedback. The feature is in beta, so any and all feedback is absolutely welcomed. Now, if we actually dive into the statement itself, you'll see there are a few tabs of navigation up at the top. If we start at the Assurances and Policies tab, here is where you will create all of your written text options, whether that be your assurances and your policies. So here we can see from the drop-down, we have 5 example ones that have come pre-built. One of these is actually a custom one that we've created. The other 4 come populated with all new financial statements. And here you can see we give you a full rich text editor for you to create your text, to create your assurances, to add in some tables, create headings, bold. And we also do have a number of pre-built templates that we have created to speed up that initial setup process. And then a really cool feature that we've packaged into the financial statements feature is our AI commentary, whereby by simply typing the @, you can gain access to KPIs, accounts, categories, and groups, and various other kinds of information from within your entity. So that speeds up the automation of your assurances and policies, where perhaps you want to have a specific assurance or policy relating to specific accounts or categories in your entity, which is pulling through from your underlying accounting provider. By using our AI commentary feature, you can simply reference that block, and every single month, depending, or every single period, when you download that new option or that new report, it will automatically pull that data through into that pre-placed block. You won't have to go in and edit it each time, which is quite nice. And as we can see, we can just go through some of the examples, assurance and policies. So here we can see this AI commentary feature in action. It's automatically going to pull all of this information from the entity. You won't have to go and enter it manually, which is quite nice. Then moving on to the Financials tab, here is where the actual financial statements are housed. So here we can see from the drop-down, we have either our balance sheet, our P&L, and then our two cash flow statements. And this is the actual visual presentation of our statements. Now, using Syft's layout feature, which can be found on the left-hand tab here under Layouts, which is quite crucial to the rest of Syft's operation and functionality, you can fully customize the visual appearance and categorization and grouping of your accounts on the left here. So that would be done and can be applied to all of your statements, whether that be the profit and loss and balance sheet in traditional normal Syft, but that also does pull through to here. So it does mean that you can have a quite nice different amount of layouts, maybe one for typical monthly management reporting, but you can also create a very specific annual financial statements layout to apply to your annual financial statements. Here we can see then we'll have our current period and our prior period for comparison, and we'll have our column for notes, which is what we will jump into right now. So the second half of our new feature offering is our disclosures and note-making capability. And this is where we've done a lot of research and a lot of new innovation to speed up a typically arduous and time-consuming process. So thankfully, one of the most powerful advantages of Syft is our transaction level detail, where we bring through every single transaction from your underlying accounting provider, whether that be bank transactions, invoices, bills, etc., etc. So at the end of the year, when you are creating your disclosures and you have to hunt through all of your transactions to figure out what is powering a certain movement in your PPE account, for example, we bring all that information through as standard in how Syft operates. So we've actually created a feature where you can go to the transaction list of your entity and actually tag certain transactions. What this means is that if you're sitting and preparing these financial statements, if you know exactly which invoices, exactly which transactions are fueling something like the movements in your PPE liner, in your PPE disclosure that we see here that has been created on Syft, you can then go and spend some time, sit down, tag those transactions, which I'll jump right into in a moment, and it will automatically draw on all of those numbers and automatically create that statement for you. So here I'll show an exact example of this. This is one of the template disclosures that you can create using the disclosures tool. If I click on the new disclosure button here, you'll see exactly what I mean. We do have a number of templates that we have pre-created across all of the chart of accounts, so that being assets, liabilities, equity, incomes, expenses. So that is to get you up and running immediately, but then you can also build up these disclosures and notes from scratch, every single line, every single column, and we do cater for two different types of notes of disclosures. We have account-based, where obviously we will be filtering on specific accounts in the columns, and that will be where we'll be pulling something like an opening balance from all our motor vehicles accounts. But then we also do have time-based or temporal-based disclosures, which can be seen in this pretty simple expense disclosure that I've created, once again from one of our pre-populated templates. I didn't have to do any of this. It took me about 2 seconds to make, and that is pulling all of our variable expenses, all of our fixed expenses for the two relevant financial periods, and this is being dictated by our layout and chart of account mapping tool, which is a bit beyond the scope of this tool, but is fundamental to how Syft works and is core to succeeding on Syft. So if I go back to this PPE disclosure note, it's also quite nice that you can build in specific checks and balances into your statement and toggle whether you would like them to show on your export or on your final statements. So here we can see I have a movement checks equation that I've created that is showing the difference between our opening balance, our total movements, and our closing balance. So here, let's say for motor vehicles, we can see we're about 500,000 Rand off the expected value. So we've got 500,000 Rand of transactions that we need to try find to add to this disclosure. Now, I can also showcase transaction tagging right here. If I click into the actual figures and use our drill down feature, which takes advantage of that transaction level information that we draw on, here we can see all of the accounts that have been configured in that motor vehicles column. And here we can see if I open up some of the accounts, I have gone and tagged all of the relevant transactions throughout the period. And here we can see I've tagged the additions, the relevant additions, all of our depreciation transactions, and all of our disposals. Now, if we go back to the statement itself, we will see here that that depreciation line item was not pulling any value. It had a zero balance. Now, I can actually showcase exactly how you would set up that transaction tagging line item in the build mode of our disclosure. So this is where you will actually create the disclosure line by line and format which line items will be there. Now, by adding format, you can configure how they are categorized, how they are grouped. You can add equations, you can add headings, and you can also add spaces just to clean up the actual presentation of your statements. In terms of source line items, which will be where your information is actually coming from, you can add a transaction tag, which we will get right into in a minute, balances, which will bring in either an opening or closing balance for both either credit or debit, so there's quite a bit of customization there, as well as an empty row, which is simply a placeholder for you to enter any kind of information you would want. So this is quite nice if you would like to create something like a issued share capital disclosure, which doesn't have a lot of financial information, but rather a lot of manual information, like the number of shares and the currency value of the shares that they have been issued at. But here, if we go to this depreciation line item, which is a transaction tag source type that was previously not pulling information, if we actually go and click on it and edit it using this new toolbar that pops up, we can actually see it is pulling the incorrect transaction tag. So tagging is a feature throughout Syft. It applies to things like your product and your customer data and other features, but we've also introduced it to transaction tagging for this new feature. And here you can see you can create custom tags, and these specific tags for AFS come quite standard. They are pre-populated in every Syft organization. And here we can see we've got a depreciation line item, but we've actually only reading amortization, which in this case there is none. So if I go correct that and make sure it's actually selected the depreciation tag, and I click edit, if I then switch back to the view mode, which will actually contain the data for our note, we will now see that where there was previously no value in depreciation, we've now populated it with a 563,000 negative value, which exactly makes up for that difference that we are missing. So now if we see that movement checks line item is now 0 because our opening balance plus our movement is equal to our closing balance for the 2023 financial year. So that is a perfect illustration of how the combination of the automation of Syft pulling through the pretty simple opening and closing balances, as well as utilizing that transaction tagging in order to automate where we are finding this information, which is a task that could otherwise take a couple hours in other software. We are able to very quickly create, just in one example, just for this column, a balancing period opening balance plus movements equals closing balance, and we're able to confirm that using a custom equation that just checks, do all my numbers match? And the beauty of it is that when we are done, when all of our numbers match, we can simply click hide row and export, and that means that when we add this disclosure to our actual financial statements that we created earlier, that single line will be hidden, and it will mean that you have the peace of mind to know that all of your numbers are balancing and all of them are correct, but you don't have to showcase that in your final report. So that about sums up the use cases and some of the new features that we have added to this financial statements and disclosures tool, and we do believe that a combination of the automation and the transaction level tagging and detailing that Syft brings in, it will save an immense amount of time and be a great value add for any organization.